for 14 of his 19 seasons. He played for the Astros, two-time All-Star, twice finished in the top 20 for MVP. For his career, he hit .295 with an .811 OPS. Very impressive. None other than Hall of Fame pitcher Don Sutton called Bob Watson, quote-unquote, his toughest out. And when he had the chance to hit in the clutch, once he left Houston and played for the Yankees, he was extraordinary. In 17 playoff games, he hit .371 with a .968 OPS. In 1988, the Astros then made him the assistant general manager. And in 93, he became just the second African-American GM in baseball history. From there, he went to the Yankees, where he became the first African-American GM to win a World Series. As the instigator for that late 90s Yankees dynasty in 2000, he helped select the USA baseball team that won the gold medal in the Olympics, and on and on and on. We're going to get to so much more of that. But, Greg, what comes to mind when you think of Bob Watson, the player?
A professional hitter. I think the thing that stands out about Bob, it's that his statistics are not going to say Hall of Fame, because he was not a great power hitter, but he was an outstanding hitter for average, and he was an outstanding contact hitter. He hit doubles, he hit some extra base hits, and he did hit a few home runs, but I think he was over only 20, I think only once in one season in his career. But he drove in 100 runs a couple of times for the Astros. He had a .295 lifetime batting average, .297, I think, in the National League, which is comparable to what both Biggio and Berkman, not Biggio, Bagwell and Berkman had right at the top of the list. And he didn't strike out very much. He struck out far less than either of those two. I don't think he struck out more than about 70 or 80 times in one season. 83, I think, was his high. And so he was just a great contact hitter. He could play the outfield, he could play first base, and he also was a great teammate, as I have been told by many, many who played with him.
Greg, when I first started following the Astros in the early 70s, Bob quickly became one of my favorite players. And I think one of the reasons that, just goes beyond his playing ability, he just seemed like such a class guy. I mean, you didn't look in the newspaper and see him getting in trouble or, getting in arguments with people. He just seemed like he was a genuinely good guy who played the game as hard as anyone. And, they even tried to make a catcher out of him. It didn't quite pan out. And, of course, he was actually well known for a couple of things that were, baseball related, but also indirectly. He was in that Bad News Bears movie. He was the one that said, "Let the kids play." So he even got on the big screen. And Roberts, of course, talked about his experiences as a general manager and an executive. So he's just a very well-rounded, and to me, just seemed like a very genuine guy.
He was. It also was baseball's 1 millionth run, and that got him a whole bunch of Tootsie Rolls for life, which he gave away because chocolate was not his thing. But he did that. That was one of his most memorable moments. It's funny you mentioned, though, a couple of things there, because Bob, I had a chance to chat with him the last time, probably 3 years or so. We were doing a piece on the Astrodome, and they wanted me to interview him with his memories of the Astrodome, and of course he did that, and we chatted for a while. But he was just a good person. He did some work with the Astros even recently. He was always involved in their little academies with the youngsters, and he would speak there at the academies. Anytime they wanted him to do something, he'd make an appearance with them. That was after he had retired from his executive position with Major League Baseball. And, it is tragic that he had to battle this kidney disease for 4 years, because his health was not good the last 4 years. But he'd already battled cancer once before, prostate cancer, when he was with the Yankees, and he survived that. In fact, that's one of the topics, one of the genesis and reasons that he and Russ Pate wrote a book a number of years ago called Survive to Win. They were talking about his battle with that and the fact that he then led the Yankees as general manager to a world championship. But no, he was just a really nice man. And anytime you lose nice men, you always regret it. And that's, I think, what all Astro fans are feeling.
I'm going to go back to that story that you guys mentioned about the 1 millionth run and the Tootsie Rolls, because that's a good story. I want to set that up a little bit later. But you mentioned the Yankees. When Watson was the Astros GM, Greg, they were starting to turn it around at that point. They had the unfortunate luck when the 94 season was cut short because of the strike. Like you said, he started battling prostate cancer around that time. And then Drayton at that point gave him permission to talk to the Yankees about their GM job. And I'm kind of wondering, any idea why Drayton did that?
Well, it was going to be a much more higher paying job, for one thing. And so he wasn't going to let that stand in his way. But when I interviewed Drayton for one of my books that I did a few years ago, he had nothing but praise for Watson. He thought he was a fine guy. And I sort of got the impression from that conversation, without a direct question, it was in part because it was going to be a great opportunity for Bob. And so Drayton wasn't going to stand in the way.
He acquired Tino Martinez and Joe Girardi, who were both huge parts of that incredible Yankees run in the late 90s. I read that despite getting pressure to trade Mariano Rivera when he first became the Yankees GM, he refused to do so. So another good mark on his record. But back to the millionth run, because this is just a great story. So May 4th, 1975, Watson scores Major League Baseball's millionth run when he stole second, which is crazy because he only stole 27 career bases. And then he scores on a 3-run shot by Milt May. The best part of the story, though, he crosses home plate moments before the Reds' Dave Concepcion, who just hit a solo homer against the Braves. And Watson said, quote, "I got to third base and our bullpen was right behind third. And the guys were saying, 'Run, run, run.' I think I beat Concepcion by like a second and a half. For scoring the millionth run, he got a solid platinum Seiko watch, which he kept but never wore, according to what I read. He got 1 million pennies and 1 million Tootsie Rolls, as Greg said. And I love this part of the story. His son Keith said him and his sister were feasting on the Tootsie Rolls for a while. But he said after a week or two, my sister and I were bouncing off the walls, and Watson decided the best thing to do was to donate them to the Boys and Girls Club. But we probably went through 10,000 Tootsie Rolls in the first couple of weeks. And like I said, he also donated the pennies to the Boys and Girls Club. But guys, have you ever tried to take 1 million pennies to your local bank? Doesn't go very well.
Oh, goodness, no. My question is, where in the world do you put 1 million Tootsie Rolls? Where did he put all that stuff?
It was quite an honor. And I think the funniest part of that really was the fact that he was being encouraged to sprint. His teammate had hit a home run, and he was encouraged to sprint from second base instead of trot, just to win that honor of being the 1 millionth run scored in baseball history. So that's a little side note, but it certainly was an interesting one.
Greg, getting back to the Yankees, when he was with the Yankees, if I'm not mistaken, he hired Joe Torre. We know what a great run that Joe Torre had with the Yankees as manager.
Right.
He did, and actually he didn't get as much credit in the New York press as he probably deserved. They kept saying, "Oh well, his assistants were doing this and they were doing that, and George was doing this, and he was kind of a figurehead." That really wasn't true, but because he wasn't a publicity hound, which was probably a very good move if you're the general manager of a team owned by George Steinbrenner, he didn't get quite the credit that he deserved for what he had accomplished during his time with George. But he was like most of the guys that have worked with George. The money was nice. Being the general manager of the New York Yankees is a prestigious position, but working under George was also something that can wear on you, and it did on him.
And then, Stephen, you mentioned earlier that the Astros tried to make him a catcher. Well, from my understanding, he was a catcher actually at Fremont High School growing up in South Central Los Angeles. And then, he had a shoulder injury in the minor leagues, which hurt his throwing. His team, by the way, in high school won the 1963 LA City title. He was playing with former Astro Willie Crawford and former big league stolen base leader Bobby Tolan. The Astros signed him as a free agent back in 1965. And Greg, you probably know this, but it was one of the better unsigned free agents of all time. Baseball America recently ranked him as the 11th best unsigned free agent in all of baseball history.
I did not know that he was that highly ranked. I've got a story, though, about his catching, because this is very interesting. I was working in Honolulu at a radio station when the baseball winter meetings were there one day, and we were trying to cover them just like anybody else, and I actually called and got Leo DeRocher to talk to me on the phone. He didn't know who I was, and of course I knew who Leo was, but there'd just been a big trade that day. The Astros had made and it left them somewhat catcherless. I don't have the details of the trade, but this was 1972 winter meetings. And so I got Leo, and I said, okay, now who's going to be your catcher? Because they had dealt whoever had been the catcher. And he says, well, Watson. Watson's going to be our catcher. And I was kind of surprised about that. And I said, because I knew him mostly as an outfielder at that time. I think he played mostly left field, a little bit of first base. And I didn't know that he was a catcher. He said, no, catcher. He caught in the minor leagues, and he's going to be our catcher. He'll give us a good hitting catcher. Well, as history records, during that 1973 season, Bob was a catcher twice. He only caught 2 games. As it turns out, Leo learned Bob wasn't really a catcher.
And I think I remember that, Greg, because as we were talking about the catcher, I was going through my mind thinking, I'm almost sure that I watched Bob catch at least a couple of major league games. So that actually makes sense.
Yeah, it was 2. I've got baseball, the baseball register open right now, and it was the 1973 season.
Yeah, that sounds right.
He played 73. He played some first base. I'm sorry, he played more than 2 games, but he played mostly left field. Right. And he was an all-star, and he was an MVP. No, he played more than 2, but he didn't play very many. And he earned his keep with his bat. He had 312 that year, and drove in 94 runs, but it wasn't as a catcher. I'll see if I can't find out exactly how many games that was. But that was the only year that he caught any games, and it was in 1973 under Leo DeRocher.
Yeah, he also encountered some racism early on. I was reading about that. Watson said, quote, growing up in South Central LA, we weren't really privy to what folks in the South were going through. So the Astros assigned him as a 19-year-old to the Western Carolinas League, but a long bus ride from the team's spring training base in Cocoa, Florida to a Salisbury, North Carolina hotel kind of led to he and 2 African-American teammates who were told to remain on the bus after their teammates got off the bus. They were taken across the tracks to a local black residence because the hotel wouldn't let them stay there. Then later, when Watson homered in his first professional at-bat and won a coupon for a free Salisbury steak dinner, the restaurant wouldn't let him in. When he called his mom to tell his grandparents, his grandmother said, or when he called home to tell his grandparents, his grandmother said, quote, hey, look, if Jackie Robinson went through it, you can go through it.
Well, he also had an incident where a white outfielder with him in the outfield caused him to get injured on a ball that was misplayed intentionally. But you know what? That is, I think, what most of us need to be reminded over and over. Jackie Robinson broke the Major League Baseball color line in 1947, but it was into the 60s when players were still having significant problems, particularly in the South. That would include Houston. When Houston got in the major leagues, as you may know the story, it was about a week before opening day that they allowed all the hotels to open to all races. And the American Football League had been playing here for a couple of years, and they didn't have that benefit. So the South was a different place. It was very tough in spring training, and it was that way until the 60s. And in the North, obviously, there was some bigotry, but there was not the same racist separation as there was for a long, long time. And that every player that was playing professional baseball during that period can tell you many stories, just like the one that Bob has.
Well, guys, here's a little bit of personal trivia for you. Bob Watson is actually the reason that I got an F on a school paper when I was, I think, 5th or 6th grade. I'll set it up for you. And it was actually a substitute teacher who gave me the F, if you can believe that. So we're in class one day, and we're asked to write a paper. And the theme of it was supposed to be, think of something that you've always wanted to do, if you ever have the chance to do it, and write it. And so it was like a 1-page paper. So I wrote, I want to sign a contract to play baseball for the Houston Astros so I can be with my favorite player, Bob Watson. So I turn the paper in. The teacher looks at it. She comes over to me and she says, this isn't even realistic. You need to rewrite this. Think of something realistic that you can do. And me, of course, being the smart aleck that I was, said, well, you didn't say anything about it being real. So thank you. Thanks to Bob Watson, I had to rewrite my paper.
Yeah, well, there's some players that today played a game that will tell you they wrote things like that too, only they did make it real and did make it years later. By the way, the catching story on Watson, he caught a total of 10 games over 3 seasons. So Leo didn't turn him into one. He caught 6 in that one year that Leo said he was going to be their catcher. Threw 17% of the runners out. And that's not very good.
Yeah, that's not good at all. Also, a little fast fact, he was the first player to ever hit for the cycle in both the American and National Leagues. How good was he? Hall of Famer Tom Seaver said, quote, he hits anything, and that's the sign of a good hitter, one who doesn't just hit your mistakes, but hits your good pitches. And Astros manager Dusty Baker said, quote, he was one of the guys that was so kind to me when I first came to the big leagues. One time after a game, he picked me up and talked to me about how to drive in runs. Also, Commissioner Rob Manfred said, I think of all of his accomplishments, the one that sticks out with me was his involvement with the baseball assistance team. He was crucial to the organization really growing to a level that it was sustaining itself. Hundreds of people who benefited from that charity owe a debt of gratitude to Bob for the good work he did it in that area, unquote. And that's, maybe his best legacy, Greg. I mean, what that organization does.
Yeah, he was working with that right up to the end. I mean, he was working with that through the Astros right up to the end, the assistance team, and also the work with the youth. Bob really had a plate that was full when you stop and think about it. An outstanding ball player for 19 major league seasons, most of them in Houston. A general manager starting in Houston, a general manager of a world championship team with the Yankees, executive position with Major League Baseball. Forget the Olympic team. He was the guiding hand on selecting the players on the Olympic team that won the gold medal. He'd done it all. He did it all in his career, and it's just too bad that he didn't have even more years to just enjoy it. Instead, we lost him at the age of 74.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.